Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back again to As I Live and Grieve. So happy that you joined us again, and so happy for you to get to know our guest a little bit today. With me today is Paulette Kranjac. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome, and I'm so glad that you joined me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Before we get totally started with questions, would you just give our listeners a little bit of your background, please?
Certainly. I have a master's degree in psychology, and I've studied public health, and I've taken courses on mind-body medicine over the years. And I have had a lot of loss. My late husband and I had 12 people die the decade before he died. And he died suddenly after we were together almost 44 years.
Wow. To have, well, I know personally the loss of a spouse it's devastating. But to lose 12 people in a period of time is horrendous. It truly is. So I'm going to just go right out on a limb here. Did all of your training prepare you for what you experienced as grief?
Oh, that's such a great question, Kathy. I have to say that I had been getting some coaching support from someone at Landmark Worldwide, which is an organization about transformation education.
Okay.
And my late husband and I had done that work as well in the 1970s and were away from it for a very long time, for 35, 36 years. But that I was in a seminar at the time, and the seminar leader coached me through some of this, which made a huge impact. That plus the fact that I went on to get trained in grief recovery and certified. And through my synagogue, listening to Rabbi David Ingber, where he talks about compassion and really almost connecting with anybody at any time, really gave me a lot of courage that even though I didn't have the people and the history and the roots in my life, that I could really connect with people. Mm-hmm. So, and everything had really come into play. I had a wonderful mother who was very independent and loving, and really showed me that I could do anything from a very young age because she did that. Mm-hmm. I'm so grateful. And I, just when I look at what went into this book that I wrote called New Way to Grieve, and really discerning a new way to grieve indeed.
Right.
I have to say it was everything in my life that kind of came together, the confluence of everything. Yes.
Right. Now, you mentioned your book, and I do want to talk about that because the title is intriguing. If you're just kind of looking for books on the shelf and you see New Way to Grieve, your first thought is, what do you mean new way? You mean there's more than one way? So what about your method is new?
I love that question. Actually, I have chills because that's really the crux of why I wrote this book. It was about the 4-month mark after my husband died suddenly, and everything had been completed. Everything had all the paperwork. Everything was, sort of normal again.
Right.
And I looked up one day at home, and I thought, okay, you can come home now. And at that moment in time, I thought, oh my God, my life is over. And I called my coach. And he said, I want you to go to the mirror. He goes, look in the mirror. I said, what? He said, look in the mirror. He goes, you're alive. your life is not over. It actually is a lie when you say that.
Right.
And then he said, what's true is that you have the opportunity to create a brand new life for yourself. And even though it sounded very harsh at that time to hear those words, I realized that how we say things really paints a picture of the future we're creating for ourselves.
Right. Right.
And I can talk more about that if you'd like.
Absolutely. Please do. I'm fascinated because I know what happened in my life, which is sort of similar, I guess. I didn't have a coach, but I know that moment when all of a sudden you feel like something's got to give and you know you're ready for something. So please continue. Yes.
So when I thought about it and how people really talk about grief, so I think one of the things I did early on was I wrote a poem called "I'm a Grief." Well, it wasn't called anything. It was just about my experience of grieving. It was about 3 weeks after my husband had died. And I took a walk, as I do, and I ran into this woman who my husband and I had seen, this exact same woman in the same spot about a year before. It was unbelievable. I'd never seen her again. She had, at the time we saw her, she had 3 huge Afghans. She was about 4'8". The Afghans were just, right? You can't get the person, right? But this time she only had 2, and we instantly remembered each other. She remembered my husband. And it turns out she's an author and a psychologist, ironically. And I showed her the poem I had written that day. And she said, "Oh my gosh, you're a grief surfer." Oh. And that became the name of the poem. And
I love that poem, by the way. I love that poem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. I appreciate your support so much. And I'm so moved by your questions. So fast forward, I took that poem with me into I put on a happy face. I got my clothing together. I got all dressed. I went to this women's group here in New York thinking, I'm just going to listen. And people were telling their stories. And I was so moved, but what kept occurring is that people were telling their stories that had happened 9, 8, 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And they were still living with the horror, the guilt, the shame, the being stuck about the loss that they had. And I said to myself, this is not a place for me. No, I'm not going to look like this in 9 years. It's just not happening.
Right.
And I left the group. What I turned to then, like we all do, is we go on Facebook, right? And I joined some widow and widowers groups. Right. And there was this post. I'm actually kind of reaching to another question that you didn't ask me, which is how I came to write the book. Is it okay if I answer?
Okay, absolutely.
So, thank you. So I came to this one post this widow had written, and she was outraged. She said, "I'm so angry. My husband's family has invited me for Christmas. Can you believe it? Like, they have no empathy about my feelings or being together with the family." And I thought to myself, how lucky, I don't have a husband's family. I had a few people in his family, but they were busy with their own lives, and
Sure.
It's a real gift when your in-laws want to have you around, I think.
Right.
So I said to myself, well, how would she have felt if they didn't invite her at all? And I posted just that. I got up the courage and I posted it. And within minutes, people were saying, all these emojis, likes, and I never get any attention when I posted here. They were like 8 within 5 minutes, right? And one of them asked me, "How did you get to this? And can I know you personally?" And so we have actually become really good friends.
Right.
And then what happened was a friend of mine from dance. I started to dance as this occurred with the coach, to discover new things about myself. And
Right.
I would go every week, and it became like a community. And after, I don't know, it was probably about 5 months, I found these two friends, this couple were actually came over, and I had, I was talking to them and whatever. And on April 8th, he died of COVID. He was one of the early deaths in Teaneck. And she was so bereft. And I said to myself, Kathy, all that matters to me is that people don't have to suffer as much as they do and get stuck.
Right.
It's like there's nothing more important than that. And that's how I came to write this book.
Okay. All right. You wanted to reach out and help others. You knew you could.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And can I say something about that?
Absolutely. Keep going.
I knew I could, because this is really the crux of it all, and maybe I went too circuitously, but the crux of it is, the definition of grief that's used by so many is this, shocking loss, and, you're suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, I'm not a religious person actually, but I have this thought that if God or whoever, right, said, okay, well, when somebody dies, you have to suffer for your whole life. Like he wouldn't, or she wouldn't have had people dying. I mean,
exactly.
It doesn't. And I also discerned that there's something very important about being sad, just pure sadness. And I write a lot in the book about pure sadness versus what we add to it.
Right.
And for me, that's why it's called New Way to Grieve.
Okay. Yeah, I remember parts of your book when you were talking about the distinction between grief and sadness. And I really appreciated that, being where I am, because I think I did that myself without realizing that that's what I was doing. So it was kind of nice to have that clarified. And it let me know that, I guess, that's what I did. I separated them. And I kept the grief because I'm going to grieve my husband for the rest of my life, but I'm going to handle it differently. And I'm going to handle and manage my life differently as well. Now, you mentioned that you had a coach. At what point did you acquire a coach? Was it intentional? Did you do it because you felt you needed it, or what?
It's a great question. It's so funny because the irony is that we had done this work, this transformational education, decades ago. I was 24. My husband was 28. We did this work, and we were away from it for 36, 37 years.
Okay.
And then we did it again in 2014. And I was in a seminar, I think it was called Creativity Pathways to Adventure. I think that's what it was called, which is pretty ironic. My husband died suddenly. And the seminar was being taught by somebody who had worked there way back when I was 24. Okay. So I actually knew him, although I hadn't been connected with him in 36 years. Mm-hmm. So, after this particular coaching he called me because I was in the seminar and he felt so bad. And I guess he remembered that he knew me and blah, blah, blah. He offered, he said, we do in the Landmark Worldwide, we do offer special coaching for people. Would you like that? And, it may give you some structure to create a new set of things for yourself in your life. And with that, I signed up. Yeah, I did.
Nice. Yeah. Do you feel that was a huge benefit for you then?
Huge. It was huge. And the other thing that actually happened around the same time was another seminar leader had reached out to me, and I said to him, and it's in the book as well, I said, you don't understand. Like, my husband didn't act right for about 2 months before he died. He was ornery and short-tempered. And I did it. Totally screwed up. Here I am writing about health. I've had a marketing company for decades and decades. Right now it's a little bit idle. But I also became a health writer about, I guess, in 2008.
Okay.
And, here I am, knowing about this, and yet he wouldn't listen, and I'm to blame. And, that's the other thing that I found, that where people get stuck, that they go over, it's almost like being on a hamster wheel. They go over the same thought. If I had only taken him when he didn't like tomatoes, something happened, he was sleeping more, something. He always liked tomatoes, and all of a sudden he wouldn't, whatever. I'm just, being a humorous example. But, there's a change of some kind, and then we blame ourselves. And this person offered this kind of coaching to me. He said, okay, you didn't take him to the doctor. I got it. And I said, are you blaming me? He said, no, I want you to know that I hear you. You didn't. And he said, do you get that you didn't? I said, yeah, I'm angry about it. He said, no, can you just be with that? You didn't. You chose not to. You chose what you chose, and you didn't do what you didn't do. And you said what you said, and he didn't do what he did. It was a whole series, Kathy, of things to go through. And I cried my heart out. Well, see, that's even an example of what I'm trying to point to, that the way we talk, I didn't cry my heart. My heart was still there, right?
Right.
I cried a lot.
Right. I get it. Yep.
Keeping it real.
Yeah.
But so when this other gentleman kind of took me through this, I was like, well, wait a minute, you're right. I didn't, he didn't say goodbye. He didn't tell me he had chest pains. He was a doctor. How could that? He goes, right, he didn't do that. Right. Can you be with that? It's like, no, I can't be with that. He shouldn't. It goes, okay, after all of that, after all the should and all the could have and only if, can you be with that? And Kathy, I got to, yes, I can be with that.
Right.
I'm responsible for what I did. I'm responsible for what I didn't. I'm responsible for what I said, what I didn't say. Right. And I had to give up blaming him, making him wrong, feeling terrible and feeling guilty, because, and then I discerned something else. When I finally could give up being angry with him for dying,
right,
and not taking care of himself, and all on top of that, he should have known, he was a doctor,
right,
all this stuff.
Right.
I could actually allow myself. I've never read this anywhere, not any course I've taken, not any coaching that I got, but I could actually allow myself to dream again when I forgave him.
Wow.
And then when I forgave myself what I did and didn't do, I was actually able to take steps to make my dreams come true.
Right, right. It's interesting how we often do that. And I suppose that's for all the phases of grief there are. We get into this bargaining and the guilt and everything, and it's just overwhelming. Sometimes you can just spin and spin and spin and spin. It was nice that you had someone tell you to stop. Let's think about this. He didn't tell you to stop.
No, he told me, look, he goes, it's a lie that your life is over. That's it.
Okay. All right.
And
he made you see reality and think about the words you were using.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So what do you suggest?
And I don't agree that there are stages. You just mentioned
I don't either. I don't subscribe to that.
Yes.
That's the common belief, is that you go through these phases of grief.
That's right.
First of all, if there are phases, there are many, many more than that. And there are many that you really can't name. But I don't think you go through phases. I certainly didn't. Mine was a natural progression. Now, how long ago was it that your husband died?
It was a long time ago. It'll be 7 years, April 30th.
All right, I'm coming up on 5 for my husband. And you mentioned it was at about the 4-month mark that you started to know that something needed to change. Is that a good way to put it?
I didn't have that actually
All right.
observation. I had the feeling of total dread. And I've read so many blogs online that people at the same point in time, 4 months seems to be the magic number,
Okay.
where there's the reality of it that really sets in.
Okay.
And they realize that their life, the way they had known it, is completely ended. Your identity ends. There's so much loss. I don't write about it in the book, but I mean, or maybe I touch upon it, but I can see it could be a whole chapter. I mean, because and I weave it through the book, but not as a chapter per se.
Right.
Because your relationships with people change, and your relationship with yourself, the way you think about your identity, everything.
Yes.
You're not protected, especially as a woman. Today, the mayor of New York talked about women who are menopausal, and that we have to be able to use the word vagina, otherwise that's 50% of the world. If we're not saying that, there's a problem. And that if women are menopausal, why isn't there air conditioning where people, work? Why aren't people accommodating to women's life-changing, circumstances? And it's so true when you're a widow, and I didn't write about this, but I've been thinking about this a lot. There's a bias, I believe, that happens as well, which I'm calling widowism. Where you're just vulnerable in ways that you have never felt vulnerable.
Definitely.
And people, people take advantage in little ways. You're less than. And it's so, I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's, you lose your job, let's say, people don't treat you any differently.
It's certainly very difficult for a widow to come back to work after 3 days. Please. If all of a sudden you're a widow, whether it was a death that was anticipated or not, 3 days is not going to be enough for you to feel solid enough to go back to work. I was fortunate that I had an employer that was very flexible and allowed me to take my time, allowed me to work in little pieces here and there, have work at home, and all that time still get a paycheck. I was fortunate, but that is not the rule. It is not at all. So you are right there. So how in your book then do you help the reader with this new way to grieve? What do you do in your book?
That's great. And also I do it with people who, call me.
Okay.
The book takes you through exercises of forgiveness, not unlike what I painted with regard to my husband and myself, what I could have done, and really, if you do the work in the book as it's designed, and you get a little notebook and you write in it, what the things you're mad about, writing letters to your whoever it is that you love, who is not alive anymore. People have found it's very cathartic and really helps them focus on the aspect of what it really is.
Okay.
And that's very, very useful. And then you can choose if you are ready to forgive or not. And it's so funny because, you could think about it this way. Well, I can't really forgive you. Okay, I'll forgive you 25%. So then you say, well, if I could get up to 100% of forgiving you, that, you gained weight and you had fasciitis and you didn't go to the orthopedist and you didn't deal with it. And then you probably noticed you had a fast heartbeat or an irregular heartbeat and you did nothing about it. Can I forgive you? And if I forgave you, I could actually begin to dream again. And if you know that by forgiving, that how powerful that is, it kind of would compel you to take a stab at it. The exercises are very detailed, and you're not alone because I walk you through it on every page, and I give you little, I guess, overviews and little sharings about how I dealt with things. And I've found people have reported that it's been so helpful.
That's great. Now, you mentioned dream. You can dream again. How important is dreaming when you've been grieving?
Well, I think they're a juxtaposed concept at this moment in time, just discussing it. And when you do look in the mirror at whatever time that you do, and you realize that you're still alive, you really have a choice. You have the choice to make. How are you going to live your life? What are you going to put in your life to fulfill you, to fulfill what's important to you? And for me, one of my dreams was I got trained in defibrillators, AED machines, and CPR, renewed my CPR because my son when he was 4, I think I took the CPR for 2, took the CPR class with the Red Cross. And then I was able to volunteer in 2 marathons, actually in the medical tent, 2 years. Yeah.
Nice.
And I also worked with a state senator, Liz Kruger, to make sure that defibrillators were everywhere that people were at risk because they weren't on the tennis court that my husband played on. And so, the dream could be, what way can you make a real impact using your loved one's life as something substantive and really to create a legacy.
That's great. That's really great. And we all know with the news lately, with the defibrillator played such an important role in Damar Hamilton.
Thank you. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really did. Invaluable.
Yes. And, it's just unbelievable. It's just so black and white when you see that.
Definitely.
How you could think of not having them everywhere, really.
Yeah, and they're really not that expensive when you consider the cost of a life.
Thank you.
Really not at all.
Not at all.
Well, sadly, Paulette, our time is winding down. So before I sign off from the episode today, I want to turn the microphone over to you and let you speak directly to our listeners without me asking any questions, and let them know how they can learn more about you, how they can contact you should they decide they want some help. This time is yours. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And also I didn't talk about the 3 triggers of grief, so maybe another time.
Well, anyway. I'd be happy to have you back. I'd be happy to have you back.
Thank you. So, yes, it's P. Kranjac, Kranjac, at newwaytogrieve.com. And I will respond very quickly. So please feel free to reach out. And also you can reach me on my Facebook page, New Way to Grieve. I think there's a Twitter account as well. I'm on all of the social media, although I have to really ramp up a little bit. But this has been a delight. Thank you.
My pleasure, certainly. I'm such a voracious reader anyway. And so much of my reading since my husband died has been books about grief. So I'm always delighted when I get one that even at my stage in my grief journey, that I can still enjoy a book about grief. I don't feel, that was years ago. I don't feel that. There's still something of value in every single book I have read. And in your book especially, Paulette, it clarified for me some of the things that transpired during my grief journey that I really didn't think fully about why they were happening or how I thought. But your book certainly gave me some clarification, and I appreciate that. As well, I love your poem, The Grief Surfer, and even just the image of a surfer surfing those waves, the big ones, the small ones, and then kind of being in the pipe, so to speak. Our listeners can't see, but Paulette is holding up her book, New Way to Grieve.
This is my husband's artwork, actually.
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Nice to have that custom book cover then. Yes. Very nice. And the book New Way to Grieve is available on Amazon. I'm sure it's available in most every bookstore, one way or another. So
it's actually not in bookstores, but you can also get it at www.newwaytogrieve.com.
Newwaytogrieve.com. In other words, if you want the book, listeners, you can get the book. There's ways to get the book. So please do. Please consider doing it. It would also make a great gift for someone maybe who had a loss several months ago. They might be receptive at this time to start thinking about what next for them. I know for me, it was the thought that I had to redefine my life. That was my thought. And so I started on that path. At any rate, it's time for us to say goodbye for today. I want to remind every listener out there to practice self-care. That is critically important as you grieve. If you know someone grieving, if you're supporting someone grieving, help them remember, too, that self-care is critical as you grieve. We have to take care of ourselves because, generally speaking, there aren't other people around to do it for us. So,
yeah, that's actually in the book, too, your well-being, how to handle your well-being.
Absolutely. There's just so much content in this book that you really need to get it. You really need to and read it. I could be your advocate. Who knows? At any rate, it's time to say goodbye. Practice self-care. And please come back again as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveinggrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.